Hi, thanks for listening to our talk about the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History and our journey to a green future. We'd like to talk about a little bit about living in a wasteful, unjust world. If you look all around us, this is reflected in our environment, in our public spaces, and we want to change that. We want to do that through the vehicle of a museum. So I'm going to be going over 5 different acts today: our introduction, museum vision, infrastructure and art, our 10,000-foot view, and now what? So Act 1, we're building a legacy. This is Dr. Charles H. Wright. He's delivered 7,000 babies in Detroit, Michigan. And so that's how this museum has started. And we want to continue this legacy for connecting the sacred between African American history, culture, the environment, multi-generations, and our community. And so we are doing this because museums are one of the most trusted institutions. It's more trusted than the governments or Wikipedia or news articles. This is done by research from the American Alliance of Museums. We want to be able to present stuff from the past, present, and future, from understanding the past about MLK and the sanitation workers' strike, to the present of Flint, to the future of being able to be climate activist. Act 2, our museum vision. So our board of trustees just passed this sustainability initiatives for strategic goals. So goal number 5 is publicly and unapologetically embrace environmental sustainable systems and practices in all aspects of the Wright institutional programs and cultures. And so with this, we're figuring out how can we do this and how can we incorporate it through all of our different departments. So this is a diagram that talks about a little bit about our sustainability ideas. We want to create a museum that's 2.0 driven of a cognitive building, so we're focusing on the architecture and our landscapes, but also being able to leave a legacy for all of our projects and programs, and being able to be sustainability neighbors. So how do we start to collaborate with other institutions and partners and community members as we start to shift our museum into a green space? We also want to start to be able to shift people's behaviors from visitors to vendors to volunteers and our staff. So here's what it looks like in a graphic form, that we are all part of one earth. This is sort of a dream job to be able to work with curators, archivists, educators, to be able to set a table, invite people in, and create exhibitions and imaginations in our institution to talk about green. So I'm going to go a little bit about our problems. Everyone in Detroit has experienced this flooding, especially this past year and in 2004. There's just incredible flooding here in Detroit, which is caused by more extreme weather events. Also, our buildings contribute to nearly half of our carbon emissions. So how can we, as building owners, also care for our building and our environment from energy, water, and waste kind of perspective? All of this work that we've been working on builds off of many projects. We started when we first came here working on reducing our utilities. One of the first projects we started on was installing variable fan drives, which reduced our mechanical systems from running all of the time, our motors. This reduced our electric bill by about $35,000. But in that, it was all very invisible and it was hidden in our walls. And it was sort of like this realization that as a cultural institution, as people come in, how do we make the invisible visible? And so we started to think about our next generation and how do we start to green our festivals, green our experiences, and be able to involve our community and youth into these discussions. So why a museum? A museum comes from this idea about that we can affect people, planet, profit, and program. So our museum definitely supports programs, educations, exhibitions, and convening conversations. So we're pushing all of these boundaries here at the Wright Museum to support our mission and green. So I'm going to go into a deep dive about one of our green stormwater infrastructure projects. We started with 16 listening sessions where we decided if we got this money that the Herb Family Foundation provided us to look at green stormwater infrastructure, especially with the drainage fee increasing for both the Charles H. Wright Museum and the Michigan Science Center, we combined forces and started questioning what is people's relationship to water and how do we start to express that in our green stormwater infrastructure. As a result of asking many questions and listening to many different kinds of conversations, we developed a green stormwater infrastructure of the Sankofa. So this is a West African Adinkra symbol that represents looking back to history before you move forward. It's a funerary symbol, but we worked with the elders so that the head of the Sankofa points to the entrance of our museum, indicating that our learning journey starts here. We couldn't have done this type of work without listening so much to the community about what was important to them and how to start to tell these stories. And now we can have the opportunity to have our volunteers and tour guides come and start to tell stories into our landscape about green kind of issues. So the building itself is 144,000 square feet, but the whole campus itself is 14 acres. We also vetted all of our work by having a Green Museum Town Hall where we discussed our different principles. And so here's just an example of how we can start to leverage convening at our museum. So some of the cost savings for our green stormwater infrastructure is that we are able to save about $1,733 for our Sankofa. We worked with the City of Detroit, the Herb Family Foundation, and the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation, Jr. Foundation. We also are working with the City of Detroit's Department of Sewer and Water. There's a large group. The Nature Conservancy started this website, and it tracks all the green stormwater infrastructure across Detroit. So just to be able to be part of these conversations and be a demonstration base of how to start to deal with these extreme weather events so that the flooding doesn't happen in our city is important. We also, because we started focusing on water, people came out to support doing activities and events and collaborations at our museum. So last year, or the year before, we did World Water Day. We brought in water warriors, we brought in dancers, we collaborated with many people and brought our entire museum to life with different water events. We also worked with our education department. We have Camp Africa, where there's about 500 students that come here every summer. We did an urban garden as one of our green stormwater infrastructure projects that was planted and cared for by the Detroit Independent Freedom School students. And so we had students from Camp Africa go and see how these gardens were being grown. Okay, Act 4, 10,000 square vision. The idea that we can start to combine art and green is something that we started to put out into the universe. This is an artist from the College for Creative Studies who won painting some of our recycled bins. We also went into the neighborhoods and started to build solar-powered projects. We worked with Ash Arter and Aaron Jones and Brandon Knight with Tammy Black to be able to build this solar-powered greenhouse. We also started bringing in the idea of like, how do you arrive to the museum? And so started bringing the bike valet so that people could ride up to the museum during different events and park their bike for free. And so we also started to have all these different conversations on what could a museum be and do, and we're starting to create all these plans. One of the really exciting projects that we're doing is that we just finished laser scanning and building a three-dimensional building information model of our entire museum. So now we have all the data that we can start to access computational design and a digital twin so that we can represent and model many different cases for green. So this is our green initiatives plan where we're starting to plan out solar, geothermal, and we'll see what sticks to be able to really make our institution walk the talk. So all of this work, we won a Sustainability Excellence Award with the American Alliance of Museums, and I would point everyone to look at this Museums magazine in June, July 2018, which was dedicated to green museums. Act 5, so now what are we doing? We are starting to work with partners. One of the latest projects that we've worked on, in 2018, we found 3 dead and dying Zelkova trees on our campus. Instead of mulching them or throwing them away, we decided to take them and mill them, started working with the College for Creative Studies right across the street to be able to make wood objects. So now we have a wood studio, and I'm going to invite you all to the Treeposium in a little bit. We also are working with Black architects because architects are some of the people that are helping to do green work in the city. So how do we start to represent these Black architects and Black spaces in a Black city like Detroit? We're also working with the National Organization of Minority Architects, and so we're doing a wiki build project on October 20th. I hope you check us out. So this is the Treeposium. It's going to be a live site that discussion about trees in Detroit and what the trees will teach us from Detroiters. It will happen Tuesday, September 21st from 6:30 to 8:30. So please tap in at dtree.me/treeposium. And then just some more information. There's, for anyone listening to this podcast about local, state, and national resources, we are part of City of Design, the 2030 District. America is still all in. So when Trump decided to take us out of the Paris Accord, cultural institutions stood up and said, we are still in. We're also doing Energy Star and benchmarking all of our utility information. And I'd also like to invite you to the American Alliance of Museums Environment and Climate Group, if you're a museum. This group meets and we discuss about climate strategies for museums and cultural institutions. Thank you. I look forward to our discussions.
Thank you so much for having me here at this CultureSource event. I'm thrilled to share some information from the Henry Ford in Dearborn, Michigan about our green effort. And I'm Debra Reid. I'm Curator of Agriculture and the Environment at the Henry Ford and am one of 3 key members of our green team. But we have many more who are across all of our divisions working towards helping the Henry Ford be a greener cultural institution. And we have many different efforts going on, but we're all directed, or the course has been set by the book by Brophy and Wiley, the Green Museum book. And that book talks about museums, cultural institutions, really as the best example of museums as community partners, and community partners that can help lead the way towards community engagement and community transformation in terms of environmental sustainability and, in fact, regeneration. That book, The Green Museum, really emphasizes the need to commit to some essentials. And those essentials are energy reduction, water management, sustainable facilities management and guest services, preservation, and green building practices. And I would say that after a couple of us read this book, it gave us an idea or a vision towards which the Henry Ford needed to go. We were still in the planning phase, and this began during 2019. And what I'd like to share next are some slides that show the results of that planning process. We started out by thinking about those essentials, and specifically the essentials of waste, load reduction, energy efficiency, and water conservation. And what we did was survey across the institution as a fact-finding mission, and we categorized things based on these 3 aspects described in the Brophy-Wiley book, and then populated with the evidence from the Henry Ford. There is a long history of the Henry Ford's engagement with all 3 of these aspects. And so as we prepared a presentation to the executive leadership team at the Henry Ford to ensure that we would be able to pursue this, we took the past forward, which is one of our foundational ideals at the Henry Ford. And so we positioned Henry Ford and Etzel looking out over the Rouge plant, which is an example of, you could say, the degradation of the environment, exacerbated not just at the Rouge, but then in carbon emissions across the planet for the past, 100+ years. but then contrasted that with some of the proactive measures that have been taken by Ford Motor Company and that the Henry Ford interprets at the River Rouge plant. And we did the same thing for each of the other key areas that Brophy and Wiley raised in their Green Museum book. The next slide shows other essentials, these being green cleaning and maintenance practices, sustainable landscapes and maintenance, green products and sourcing, and green transportation. You see this table is a bit less populated. So this is one of the areas that we decided that we would pursue once we developed our plan. Composting specifically, recycling in general, are two of the three topics that we're undertaking as a group. And thus beginning to address some of those more green practices in those facilities, grounds, maintenance areas. And our team includes key individuals within facilities and grounds, as well as buildings and maintenance and custodial. The next image shows some of the water retention efforts, huge efforts that we undertook but it took over 25 years to reconnect the oxbow that had been severed from the Rouge during the Corps of Engineers channeling of the Rouge back into a holistic environment that then links the water management and the grounds, and then the larger ecosystem transformation in the area. The next slide shows one huge focus, and that's our food service area. So the effort to develop a green food system is all-consuming and is also part of our programming in terms of, or planning, I should say, in terms of the composting effort especially. And this is the area that's in the most development at the moment. Transitioning then to the next slide, introducing the concept of preservation as a green and sustainable practice. The Henry Ford is an open air, includes Greenfield Village, which is an open air museum with relocated buildings, really from Connecticut to California. Those buildings have been preserved through what now we can call a green practice. It is more sustainable, environmentally sound to repurpose a building, especially those that are threatened, as many of the buildings in Greenfield Village were. So taking that the step further, the past forward, is the next slide where we itemize the green preservation practices, the green exhibit and events practices, and the conservation and energy efficiency of those events and preservation efforts to establish our internal baseline for that work. Last but not least, in terms of the itemization, is the next slide, which is green education. The Henry Ford has had a school, the Edison Institute School and the trade school from the Ford Motor Company, all worked as part of this school garden. And today, we continue to seek to engage with growers in the area. This is a William Davidson entrepreneur in residence, Melvin Parson, who is Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor gardener and principal of We the People Opportunity Center. And he is really our inspiration for engaging broadly with communities and the urban agriculture movement as it relates to one of our newest programs, which is a big preservation effort ongoing now, and that's the reconstruction of the Central Market building that was in downtown Detroit, providing food to Detroiters during the late 19th century. And then the green education and the schools, school gardens funnels into the larger green education efforts of the Henry Ford, which is the next slide, itemizing some of the things we're doing and helping us establish what more we want to do. The next slide simply shows the sustainability guiding principles that we developed. I won't elaborate on these, but we devised these as a team of 7 people, having built this internal evidence of practices in 2019 and early 2020, and then we delivered a PowerPoint that we believed, hopefully, justified our existence as a cross-divisional effort within the institution. And the next slide indicates that we were successful. We were chartered May 2021, and we, as I said, have a core leadership of 3, facilities and grounds, director, administrator to our CFO, and a curator. And together then we work across divisions even more, benchmarking, which is a huge effort, not just within our institution and our peers, but also organizations and then trades and contractors who do composting, recycling, and other waste management. We are benchmarking our energy use to establish that baseline on which we can then determine how effective we are at reducing use and charting new directions that are more sustainable and regenerative. I think the last couple of slides here indicate preliminary results from a staff survey that we did to help measure how folks understand what we're doing and either want to learn more or give us charges on how to proceed. So is your decision to recycle or not recycle at work affected by ease or convenience? Well, it's obvious that's yes. So we need to, as we work on recycling as one of our subcommittees, be mindful of ease, clarity, and communication of those goals within the Henry Ford and to our guests. And the next one simply indicates that the Henry Ford's environmental efforts do matter, that our staff does understand more than somewhat, in fact, very close to very important green and sustainability efforts and environmental goals generally further our vision and our values. And this is all really important as we are on our journey to 100 years right now. And the last slide, in conclusion, we came up with an idea about what makes Henry Ford's green efforts unique, and that it is just, we are learning, aligned with many other cultural institutions. So how unique? Part of a movement, I'd say, that we approach this with engagement of divisions across the institution, and we seek to model best practices that others have set, and that we take our lessons from our past in ways that can help guests and staff chart a better future. So thank you for that.
Hello, I'm Andy McDowell, Manager of Sustainability with the Detroit Zoological Society. I'm here today. I'm very honored to share with you some of the successes and lessons learned that we've experienced along what we call our green journey towards sustainability. We've got a very important mission that we really try to live through. And what you'll notice right in the beginning of our mission is that we try to demonstrate extraordinary leadership in conservation, animal welfare, education, and environmental sustainability. These are our 4 pillars that we really set up our foundation upon to accomplish all of our goals. The way that we do this is really by serving the Tri-County area in Southeast Michigan. We have a couple of facilities right now. We've got the Detroit Zoo in Royal Oak and the Belle Isle Nature Center, which is right on Belle Isle in the Detroit River down in Detroit. Forthcoming will actually be the future, the Great Lakes Center for Nature, which will be coming in Macomb County here at some point in the near future. Our vision, it's really all about nature for us. And just like our 4 pillars in our mission statement say, it's all about that connection between conservation and sustainability. And nature, it's about learning, loving, and elevating it to the same level as humans in our human-based systems. Conservation and sustainability for us to go hand in hand. Being a zoo, the conservation mindset is really one of the forefront goals that we really try to achieve, but it goes hand in hand with sustainability. And it's we look at it as along this spectrum. So conservation would be out there trying to preserve these existing wild spaces that are intact right now, but it goes much further, and it goes into thinking about what is the future? What is the future of how humans and nature coexist together? And that's really for us about what the sustainability vision is all about. We do this largely through our blueprint or our sustainability plan, which we actually call Greenprint. This sets the framework based on a systems approach that breaks it down into the different systems as you can see here: energy, water, waste management, landscape, stormwater, education and advocacy, as well as community engagement. To do this, we've got a couple of committees. One of them would be at our board level. We call it the Greenprint Committee. And then we've also have an internal green team made up of our staff. To start with, when we look at the energy systems, we set a goal that to reduce electric and natural gas use 30% by 2025 from a 2009 baseline levels. Over the last several years, there's been a number of initiatives that have gone in, and including some of these on the screen right here. We've have some solar displays that are out around campus. We're starting to integrate and put in some EV car chargers. But I would say one of the forefront practices that we've actually installed here is the anaerobic digester. And this is a pretty awesome system where it actually takes the animal manure, the waste, and it's not only converting it into high quality compost, but it's actually capturing the methane that is released in the anaerobic process and converting that into energy that can be used to help power some of our buildings on site. The next system would be water systems. Our goal here is really to reduce the demand by 40% by the year 2025. And to achieve this, we're exploring options to harvest rainwater for reuse. And what we have is we've got a 128-acre site here. And being a zoo, naturally, there is a very high demand for energy and water just to be able to take care of the wildlife, take care of the grounds. So it's very important for us as we go through and start to explore options to reduce this. We've already implemented a couple of practices, including not using potable water to supply any of our on-site ponds or lakes. The next system would really be waste management. And this one has really been quite exciting. As soon as you come in through the gates, you'll start to notice some of the changes we've made here. We no longer sell the one-time use water bottles. We encourage guests to bring their own water bottles to refill. We have refill stations across the campus. There's also these the products that we sell, such as the toys and the giveaways. Those are actually all upcycled items. We use some reclaimed materials on site throughout some of our restaurants. We've got the recycled material boardwalk. And again, just to point out this anaerobic digester, this is another example of trying to ensure that waste that is produced on site is actually turned into something else within our own facilities. The landscape management has really taken a step forward here where we've converted over to electric powered equipment, such as the lawnmowers, the golf carts to get staff around campus. And then we've even gone as far as trying to plant some trees, not only within our campus, but also throughout the community. We have a goal to plant 2,000 trees between the years 2021 and 2022, and we're doing really great making great progress toward that goal. We also have a variety of urban habitat projects going on, including pollinator gardens, bat houses, and other wildlife habitat structures. Stormwater management. Over the last several years, there's been some projects such as green roofs, rain gardens, and a variety of pervious and permeable pavements, as you can see here, that have been going in across the campus. And really, our main goal here is eventually we do want to manage a 100-year storm event all within our campus. And more than anything, it's about retaining not only the first flush, but trying to go for a 2-year storm event across all impervious surfaces. Our next big goal here was education and advocacy. And being a cultural institution, I think we all can understand and appreciate how important this is to bring the public along with us on our green journeys. So some of the programs we've done has been some videos online. We actually post those through a variety of different formats, but also we provide some education through something we call the Virtual Vitamin Z program, which is featured on our Facebook page. These are just a couple of the many programs we have in place. Community engagement, big part of what we're trying to do. Yeah, we do a lot throughout the Tri-County region, but also beyond that. And here there's a few examples, not only doing things off campus, such as the Lake Muscadet cleanup, which is one of the lakes on Belle Isle, but also inviting guests onto our campus facilities for things such as Green Fest or the Run Wild. These are all events where we're really trying to teach along the way. We're giving out trees. The Run Wild event has been a great success in the fact that we don't pass out one-time use water bottles. It's actually giving away reusable water bottles to participants. Gorillas on the Line has been a successful event as well. And this is really trying to encourage people to understand that as we make movements toward electronics in the sustainability front, electronics really do demand a lot of special metals to go in there. And as a result, those special metals, we've been having to go in and do mining in places, especially like the Congo and across Africa and other places of the world. And so this is trying to help bring a reminder that as we have these electronics, we should really recycle them and keep them within the stream for reuse. Lastly here, I just wanted to point out some of the next steps. We are looking to update our sustainability plan, our green print, and really trying to focus on the next chapter. And we're going to revisit each of these systems, and we're going to try to put together an improved game plan here that really is about taking us to net zero, especially when we think about energy and net zero carbon. But also, eventually, we're trying to get to this net positive. You're going to hear a lot of my colleagues mention the word regenerative. That is a very special word, but that is really about what it means to be is net positive. It's about bringing it to the next step. It's healing, and it's doing more. Thank you. I look forward to you joining us on our green journey.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists for those presentations. And now we'll just kind of jump into a roundtable discussion on some topics in sustainability. So CultureSource being a member organization, we have a lot of members, a lot of large institutions such as yours, but we also have some medium-sized and smaller orgs, loosely associated groups of artists. So what I think would be really useful is we've just heard about solutions that have worked for your institution. So what advice would you give to some of those smaller institutions looking to get started, or really any institution, tackling sustainability can feel like such a large task. So where could someone start, and what's the first thing they could do to start thinking about their impact on the environment? And feel free, anyone who wants to jump in, we can go in a row or anywhere.
Would you like to go first?
Gather data. One of the first things is just to get a handle on your energy use as far back as you can go. Or that's one of the things that we at the Henry Ford started with. But it's also about realizing that if you're in the situation you are, you've got peers out there that are likely in the same situation. And whatever professional interest group you align with, reach out to those peers. Because I've had the benefit of going to 2 or 3 of Leslie's conversations with other organizations, and that I would take that home to the Henry Ford and say, this is what I heard, and these are our peers, and we can begin to do this work. And those peers exist at every level.
Sure, that's great.
Yeah, I would say that, creating the vision, a shared vision among the team and team leaders is very, very important. And then following that is starting to put into place both a top-down and a bottom-up kind of approach, where you really have to have champions. And so the champions, it's so important to have them right at the top, especially to clear obstacles, that may come up along the journey. And but the bottom-up approach, there has to be a grassroots team. That would include staff members, volunteers. The community is also part of that, but they can be, part of the entire process. So starting to put those elements into play, I think, would be a good starting point.
Yeah. To echo the Detroit Zoo, it definitely does help to have that support, and I feel so lucky that we have Neil Barclay, our CEO and president at the Wright Museum, and Jeff Anderson, the COO and vice president, that they both have built LEED buildings. And so for them knowing how important it is to actually have sort of the support behind doing these types of constructions is incredible. But also to answer your question about your members who might just be artists, we're doing a lot of collaborations right now with artists. And I do see our institution helping to kind of create an archive and collect data so that we can give information to artists and resources to artists so they can also iterate on that sort of art from more of a technical space that they're working from. And I do feel like we started mapping out the systems of just energy, water, and waste. And in just doing that and just having these different lenses of how we look at the world, from a zero carbon sort of footprint to how climate change is going to be affecting our lifestyles. Like, there's just so much richness to be able to build off of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, there's also the problem is that, sometimes sustainability and climate change, it's a problem we're experiencing, but it's almost doesn't feel as immediate as something like COVID-19, where it's constantly being covered and you see the impact and the loss of life day to day. So when creating these plans and frameworks and reaching out to your peers, how do you strike a balance between, responding to the immediate crisis, but also not letting those long-term goals, fall by the wayside? How do you make sure that you're still thinking about things like sustainability and long-term change when you're still in the midst of an ongoing crisis? And how have you guys thought about that?
Well, I would say that the crisis partially helped us justify or argue for and receive the authority to proceed. And some said, especially when we closed last March, it was not that, this would not be the time. And yet that's when we allied. We were all homebound in many ways, but Zoom calls abounded, and Teams, and we managed to pull together these documents and do this, grassroots work during that time and argue that it was really essential in the future. So we've been able to maintain it now that we're reopened and moving forward.
I think too, creating a new language collectively is helpful both in the short term and long term. So I know the way we work is creating a lot of different pilot projects or example projects and just learning how to create those teams and those support systems, being able to learn how to message these things because they are so technical. How do we start to introduce this into our writing scripts for our group tours or different things? So I just feel it's such an opportunity to be working at a cultural institution that's a third space, that's open to the public, that's mission-based and educational. And there's just opportunities to be able to take the learnings and feel so fortunate to be at an African American museum where there is a history of like resiliency and self-reliance, of making something out of nothing, and being able to take those stories and overlay it onto all of our work, both short-term and long-term.
Yeah, I guess I would just add, I mean, being part of a zoo is pretty phenomenal. You know, it's the gateway to appreciating nature, wildlife, natural systems, and really trying to gain an appreciation for what those systems really mean to humans. And, you know, it's more than just seeing an animal. You know, it's seeing a species, a habitat, a biome, trying to put it all together. So sustainability, it's so important to keep at the forefront of our mind that we've been on a run now for quite a while where, you know, being part of the Anthropocene, where the humans have really played a significant role in the landscape that has really kind of it's been quite negative. We need to change that. It needs to take on a whole new face. And so sustainability to me is the future. Mm-hmm. It's how do we drive a positive relationship between humans and nature and those wild places.
Yeah, and something you mentioned before we started the discussion was, you know, in relationship to humans and their surroundings and environments, it's in the mundane things like the parking lots, which you don't think too much about. You just see it for what it is, which is a lot. But then you think about its impact, how many there are. So it seems like some of this work is done in the work of being more sustainable is done in maybe the work that isn't flashy, but that's necessary. And does that seem like a fair classification?
I would say yeah, it can be. I think that I think it's important to think about sustainability as a systems-based approach. So if you were to take that and think about the footprint of a facility or the property at the zoo, nature doesn't recognize necessarily, it may or may not, most likely it doesn't, those property boundaries. Those property boundaries are all, you know, human influence. So that parking lot that we were referencing earlier, it sits within a watershed. It sits within, you know, a larger urban habitat, you know, where it once supported a certain plant community. And so when we start to think about what that means, we pull it apart and then we're trying to put it back together so that those natural systems can function as they're supposed to. And so I think when we think about it, if we were to think about it from a landscape approach, it really puts a whole different spin on what sustainability is and so what that future can really hold.
When I see a parking lot, I see, oh my gosh, runoff, wastewater runoff, and wasted solar energy. And innovation is the key, and the Henry Ford is supposed to be this little incubator of innovation. So there's so much that the cultural institution can do to help encourage this. We do invention convention, and there have been a lot of students who have worked on cleaning oceans, which is obviously critical to climate change. But what more can be done with those parking lots? Mm-hmm.
I just real quick wanted to revisit what you had mentioned, because I think that there are some, in many ways, to do some sustainable practices. Sometimes it is very simple solutions that might not be very artful, might not be the most attractive, but I think that's a challenge, right? Is to think about how can we do it so that they are attractive. Mm-hmm. And being part of cultural institutions, those are great opportunities. And one of the things that the zoo really prides itself on is trying to give guests both of those opportunities. So, for example, we have a photovoltaic solar display that is actually called the Smart Flower. And it actually opens up much like a flower does in the morning, and it tracks the sun throughout the day, just like a sunflower would. But we also have a display that it's just solar panels on a picnic pavilion, just to give an example of how homeowners may be able to do that on the roofs at home. So I think it's a little bit of hey, this is really great, artful, and enticing, but here might be a simple approach for how you could apply this at home.
Mm-hmm. And it feels very intentional too, like the creating solar panels that are also a sunflower. That feels like really bringing art into the technological solution. I think that's a great take. So while we're talking about innovations and how innovations and thinking about new ways to do things and develop things, what is sort of your process for evaluating when an innovation is worthwhile to invest and move forward, or maybe how do we look at innovations from all sides and make sure they're actually sustainable and not just the latest new thing? And I think an example I'll give is NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which we'll be discussing during Watch the Space this week. And it's a way to digitally sell art, digital formats of art and arts in different file types and one-of-a-kind pieces. And they're selling for thousands, millions of dollars in some cases. But it turns out this digital art creates a lot more waste than we thought, because to power one single digital token requires more power than a European would use in a decade in their private household. And in some cases, dirty factories, old oil refineries are brought back online to power NFTs. So when we think about new innovations, how do we make sure that they're actually innovations for our climate? And how might you guys go about evaluating?
Well, that's why I really appreciate our board of trustees and our executive leadership supporting this D-Tree project collaboration with the College for Creative Studies across the street. Just thinking about something as simple as let's not put these trees that we found that are dead and dying into the landfill or mulching them, and using that, and it's almost created this seed where we're reimagining what a wood shop studio looks like at the College for Creative Studies. We're looking at how a panel discussion gets reimagined at our museum, and how sort of we're co-creating this curriculum together on African material culture, on the past, present, and future of the tree relationships in Detroit and beyond, and in Michigan, and just learning from that. And it seems like in just that one stroke, we are getting to change our internal systems to be more inclusive. We created a scholarship that we had to recruit for, and it just seems like, how wonderful to think of things so holistically. I'm going to go back to Patrick's discussion where he said, let's not even use the word sustainability, let's use the word resiliency, because we want to be able to think about these systems differently. And it seems like, when you start to really dive in deeply to a systems approach, then that's the innovation, when new things come up and you're starting to think about what are those touch points between the entire experience of putting on both the backstage and front stage of a cultural institution. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think taking as much of a wide-ranging perspective on it is important. But there's a fine line between really looking at it and then getting into analysis paralysis. So I would say that when we try to assess innovations, we are also very, very lucky to, we have a board, a very diverse board. We have a green team with staff, and I think there's a lot of communication and dialogue. And then it's really up to the sustainability department to really kind of also lead the fact that we can do our research and then come forward with the recommendations. But sometimes we get into situations where it's a little bit of how do we make sure that we can test this, go through with, failing quickly in some ways, right? Run a prototype of certain things. And I think that it's great being with the Detroit Zoological Society, because there is so much support from the board and the community members in trying to help explore, new grounds. I mean, the anaerobic digester, I think, is just a fabulous example of that, where, it's really trying to think outside the box, and but at the same time, you know, take a technology that in some parts of the world is really, it functions really well, but it's a little bit newer to this region. So, yeah.
Network theory is Thomas Hughes, I think, and that it's tough to change. So some institutions are slow adopters. And I could never answer the question of how do you know when something is you know, of its time and worthy of investment. How do you help people adopt things that are now and needed? And that's the water bottles. These, you know, refillable water bottles and filling stations are key. EV hookups, they're used regularly. There are apps that you can find them. They're positive for promotion, and they're like a banner for we've invested in the future. We're working on adopting all of those things.
Sure. So it seems like the themes are be willing to change and be okay with, you know, maybe some things don't always work out, but it's a learning experience and not a failure necessarily.
Well, we'd like to not have things not work out.
Right.
I think that's the key to sustainability too. Like, you put in so much time and energy into these constructions, and we were actually sidebarring about that earlier, of just how technical some of these projects are, and having the right team so that, and sort of the right program, I suppose, with the right support behind it, so that these projects are successful. Yeah.
Great. Well, so I wanna wrap up with a little bit of positivity, because it seems like there's always a lot of bad climate news. You know, you don't even have to look for it. But I'm interested to hear from our panelists, what is one thing that makes you hopeful right now? It could be a project, an initiative, something you're doing, or something you've seen. You know, anything that just gives you hope that we are headed in the right direction, or we can change if we really try. And feel free to take a moment to think about it.
Well, I think in this day and age, there's sometimes almost too many streams of communication, but the fact that communication is the information is out there. The information's available. You don't have to go searching very hard for it. So I think that it gives me hope, because some of the green practices, just as simple as, you know, implementing greenways and making sure that we've got, you know, bike lanes and streets. Yeah, you're starting to influence culture in, I think, a very net positive way, and I think that gives me hope, you know. And certainly, being somebody who works at with the Zoological Society and somebody who loves nature, I think just the fact that there's this resurgence for being outdoors. That definitely gives me a lot of hope.
Sure.
Curator of Agriculture and the Environment, and just today, this is kind of global, but just today I learned that the UN is going to be debating agriculture and innovations to save the planet, because there's a lot of critique of our chemical-dependent agricultural system, but agriculture dominates the footprint of the U.S. and others. I mean, 80% of the U.S. landscape is rural and agricultural. So to me, this international effort to try to bring forward what farmers and scientists are trying to do to be more sustainable and ideally regenerative, right? Not zero, but 0+ or zero positive. I'm looking forward to that conversation.
I feel like I have two answers. Like, one being that we're in Detroit, and there's such a rich history here of people who have been working with land, with soil, and all of that information, with like even organizing themselves so that we can address pollution and turning off water and just like these different issues. Like, this is an incredible rich history here in our region, and to be able to reflect that into our installations and our demonstrations and stories, like I feel like it just brings this whole regional kind of conversation of how does Detroit become an example for the rest of the nation almost. Like that's what kind of warms my heart. And the second thing is like groups like CultureSource or the Green Task Force for the City of Detroit or other different types of organizing groups, that there's beginning to be so many people in our space that at first, even thinking like, oh, I'm going to be going into sustainability, is it so crowded? But it's just so welcoming, and to be able to start to talk and share information and build off of that from each other, you start to get this like technical toolbox. And every time I interact with someone, it just grows bigger and broader and deeper. And that's one of the models that we're putting into this museum of just how do we welcome in people wherever they are, at whatever point there are, knowing that each of our installations go really deep, and we will help people keep getting deeper and deeper into these dialogues, and there'll be this framework and this kind of intervention here so that we're building for the future. So and if we build it right, I feel like, which is why you don't want to build it wrong, it'll just become that much more precise that people can use our facility as a tool for conversation, for education, to really start to change people's hearts and minds on how they want to put nature first.
Great, yeah. And I'll just say the Daily Climate Show by Sky News International runs every day. My favorite, because they always, they're very solutions based, and it feels a little less doom and gloom and a little more of examples of what everyone can do. So that's where I get my daily dose of good climate news. So thank you all so much. Anything else that you like to add or that you're dying to get out there before we wrap up?
Big thank you for organizing this. It's been a pleasure to be involved in the conversation.
Yeah, I concur. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like I want to keep talking to you both and create a new language and share like wayfinding signage. And I think that's what's so great about actually the space is that there is a lot of sharing that can go on, and I look forward to the future.
Sure, absolutely. Well, keep sharing and chatting with each other and with us at CultureSource and our members. Thank you so much, Leslie and the Charles H. Wright Museum for hosting us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you guys for sharing your time and for being our thought partners on sustainability. And we really appreciate it. So thank you so much. And thanks to our audience for tuning in to watch the space. We're looking forward to having a dialogue with y'all this week.